When I was a little girl, I loved spending time with my grandmother. And one of the things that we always did together was putting up vegetables. That's what we called it, or canning tomatoes, like we're going to be talking about today. You can get your tomatoes, whether you grow them yourself, get them from your neighbors, get them from the farmer's market, just whenever it's tomato season, get the best ones that you can find. Wash them up real good. After we wash them, we're just going to cut an X in the top. You could do this in the bottom if you wanted. I like to do them in the top. And that helps where it splits at for when you peel them off later and makes it really easy. Get a really big, good sized pot. The way I like to do it, I don't know, I think about 25 pounds of tomatoes comes in a bushel if you're buying them. I go by at least a half a sink full, because there's differences in sizes in your tomatoes and things like that. So you need a pot big enough to hold your tomatoes. You can do them in 2 or 3 batches or whatever, but go ahead and get your water real hot while you're washing your tomatoes, right at boiling. It doesn't have to be, but right at it, because you're just going to do what's called blanch them after we cut the X's in the tops. But then you drop them down into the boiling water for just a few seconds, anywhere from 20 to 30 seconds. If you're looking at them real good, you'll see when that skin just sort of peels away. So that's what you're looking for. So in the meantime, after you've washed your sink out, after you washed all the tomatoes, you're getting the tomatoes into the pot. Then you're going to have a spider or a big spatula, whatever you're going to use to get them out, and get that batch out into a sink full of water filled with cold water and ice. And that immediately shocks them back in so they don't start cooking or anything that you're not wanting, but makes them be ready to peel the skins off. And you just let them soak in that ice water for a few minutes. Then the skins, they just peel right off. And the next thing you'll do, this is where your handy paring knife comes in handy. You'll use it to grab the skins if you need to, and just have another big bowl sitting aside to put these in the meantime. So you'll pull those skins off, use your little knife to core them, just cut out that hard center part and put them all, aside in a bowl for when you're getting ready to pack. While all this was happening, I already washed all of my rings, my seals, and my jars. I'm using pint-sized jars because that's how tall my canner is. And then I put my jars in the in the oven on 170, 175, and just leave them in there to stay hot and sterile. I'm not hot packing, so you can pack into, after you've sterilized them, you can pack into cold jars. So you don't want a thermal shock. I guess I should put that in there. Don't use cold tomatoes or something you've had refrigerated in a hot jar, and you don't want hot stuff going in a cold jar. So my jars end up sterilized and medium heat, I guess would be a way to put it for this moving forward. So what I do at this point is I use a sterilized tray, put all these tomatoes out on the tray, and I'm going to sort of quarter them, maybe into quarters or sixths or whatever, and then cut them the other direction so they're pretty good sized dices. And then if you were making stewed tomatoes, you would put this in with your onions and bell pepper and basil, whatever you want to, and cook them. But we're not. In this instance, we're going to raw pack. So I'm going to dice them all up and put them in the jars. And you want to pack it in there about as tight as you can. Now let me slow down, back up a minute. I'm getting ahead of myself here. Before I start dicing the tomatoes, after I peel them and core them and get them set aside, and man, do these things make more juice than you ever imagined, and get the jars ready. But as the jars, I get about a half a dozen of them at a time, 4 to 6 of them ready at a time. You're going to have to put something in there. Even though tomatoes are acidic, you're going to have to put something in there to make them more acidic, so that a water bath and not a pressure canning is required for them, and that it'll be acidic enough to preserve them. The 3 choices that I'm familiar with are lemon juice that's got to come out of a jar so it's consistent acidity, and citric acid, which it just takes, like a quarter of a teaspoon of that if you're using it, or vinegar, which is what I have today and what I'm using. With the lemon juice, you would use, for a pint, maybe 4 tablespoons. With the vinegar, you can use between 2 to 4 tablespoons, and you can use apple cider vinegar or regular. You want it at least 5% acidity, or so your choice. I'm using the vinegar. If you use the lemon juice, it'll always taste a little bit like lemon. If you use the vinegar, after 6 weeks or so, you won't taste the vinegar in there anymore. And the citric acid, same thing, slightly tart. That's why a lot of people add sugar when they're making a tomato-based sauce and things later on. It's not just the acidity of the tomato itself, but when the tomatoes are canned and preserved, more acid has to be added in to keep them going. So I put the vinegar down in the bottom of the jars first. Then I pack the jars as full as I can fill them with my diced tomatoes. And then I put a half teaspoon for pint-sized jars, or a full teaspoon for quart jars, if we were making those, of salt on the very top of them. And you don't want to use iodized table salt. Use your canning salt, because it doesn't have like an anti-caking agent or whatever in it. I used Celtic salt because it's also unprocessed, and that's just the salt that I use at home. So anyways, put your salt on the top. And whenever you get your small number of jars that you were working on there filled, wipe the rims. I wipe them down with a paper towel. Then I have another paper towel that I put vinegar on, and just wipe around the very top where you're going to seal it at, to make sure that it gets a good seal. We're going to leave what's called head space at the top of the jar, almost an inch, probably about 3/4 of an inch. But the top of your jar and the bottom of the rim part, that's a 1-inch head space. If you go halfway through there where your first big thread's at, that's going to be a 1/2-inch head space. Halfway between there and the top is a 1/4-inch head space. And that's the space that you leave in there for your tomatoes and stuff to cook down in the jar. I use a little bubbler thing. You can use a butter knife if you're real careful. You don't want to scratch the inside of your jar, but you dab this all the way down to the bottom, all the way around the jars and through the center, and you keep doing it until there's no bubbles coming up, because bubbles are air, and air contains who knows what, but we don't want anything in our jars. So we do that, then we wipe off the rims. Then the way I do it, they used to have you boil your lids and stuff. Now you don't have to. But I just put them in boiling hot water over them before I start, to where they're still pretty warm, and it gives them a good chance of a seal. You seat the little flat lid on your jar, and then when you put the round part on it to screw it on, you only want that fingertip tight. If you put it too tight, your lids are going to kink up and it's not going to seal. Don't ask me how I know that, but it is from experience, and I even messed up doing it a little bit too tight on a batch of stuff this year. Anyway, so just fingertip tight with the rings on there. And then we're going to have our pot of water. Here's your two choices again. You can have your water boiling if you're putting things in there that are hot jars, hot stuff on the inside, and hot water. But since our tomatoes are room temperature on the inside, we're going to put them in the pot with the water just warm, not even, hot or anything yet. You can't put your jars on the bottom of your pot. You have to have, one of those wire looking circular things that comes with half of your pots that you don't know what in the heck you're supposed to do with. We'll put it down in there in the bottom of there now, so that your jars don't touch the bottom. This keeps them off the bottom a little bit. And then you probably fill your pot about halfway with water as you put each jar in there. And mine holds 7, I believe it is. Some hold up to 9, but as you put your jars in there, you I lost my train of thought. Sorry. Gonna pause right here a minute. As you put your jars in the pot, the water level is going to rise from the weight in the pot. So after it's done, you want the water to be an inch over the top of your seals, or of your jars and lids. So if it's not, what I do is keep a kettle of hot water, boiling temperature, next to it, and I top it off with that. And about every 10 minutes, I double check that it's still an inch or more over, and I top it off if it's not. And I let these water bath for 25 to 30 minutes. So you leave them in there right at, boiling, not, boiling off of the stove, because your pot's going to be pretty full, but pretty boiling as you can be without it boiling over. And then at the end of that time, you use your jar lifter, bring them all out of there, put them on a towel or something that you got sitting on your countertop, and then just leave them alone for 24 hours. And you'll start hearing the pops usually just within a few minutes. The next morning or the next day after your 24 hours, look at them all, and if any of them have not went in the centers, if you still see it popped up, you can touch it with your finger. If it moves at all there in the center, then that one didn't seal. You can start that processing all over again, or you just sit that one in the fridge and you cook with it within the next couple of days. So all of mine sealed. So then after everything's dry, it's set there 24 hours, then you unscrew all of those rings off of the outside of them, and you try to pick up your jars by the little flat lid part to make sure it's good and sealed, and it should be. So then after that, you wash them and dry them, and you can put your labels on them. If one other tip here is, whenever in your boiling water that your jars are going to be sitting in to water bath, you can put half a cup or so of vinegar in there, and that'll keep your jars from getting cloudy. I'll do it when I remember it. Whenever I forget, I'm washing them off afterwards anyways, and we don't have real hard water, so it's fine either way. It doesn't harm it. So now you just put them up. You never stack them on top of each other, and you don't leave those rings on them, because that can artificially keep that seal down when the seal may have popped off at some point and your food not be safe and maybe have a botulism problem or something like that. So that's why you take those rings off. Plus they rust if you leave them on there. So that's about it. Now, they used to be that these canned vegetables, preserved vegetables, would be good up to 20 years. I always put the date, that I did them on there. But now they're saying 18 months. In other countries, they're saying 13 months. But I will leave that up to you. What we try to do is preserve about a year's worth at a time. And then if we were to do 2 or 3 years worth now, then we would just not grow tomatoes next year and have more squash and do, a couple of years of it that way. But what we do is try to do enough to where we're just fixing to run out when next season's time to can again. So good luck and happy canning. And if you have any questions, please let me know. I would love to know where you're watching from. Make sure and subscribe and hit the ding bell if you want to know more about preserving or cooking or any kind of questions. Just let me know and I will be glad to help. Life on the farm is good and I enjoy it, and I hope you do too.